welcome to GB Mag Chats. GB Mag Chats, where international students get answers.
Hi everyone, welcome to GB Mag Chats, where we answer all the real questions international students have about living and studying in the UK. I'm Sophie, your host, and today we have Olivia joining us to discuss culture shock. Olivia, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So my name is Olivia. I am from Alabama, USA, and I studied abroad in Stirling, Scotland in 2019 and have wanted to go back ever since I left.
I don't blame you. It's beautiful.
It is.
So Olivia and I will be discussing culture shock, which you may or may not have heard of as a term. Basically, we'll be covering what on earth is culture shock if you haven't heard of it, and what does it mean in real terms when you make the big move to come and study abroad. So let's start by sort of talking about what is culture shock. Olivia, I don't know when you had your first experience of it firsthand. Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Sure. So my first experience with culture shock was when I rode my first bus in Scotland. Where I'm from, we don't really have public transportation, or at least it's not as widely used. So I was already nervous about navigating the buses. And I got out a few pounds out of my wallet and I was ready to pay. I wasn't quite sure of the price. So I asked the bus driver how much it was. And he replied, and I couldn't even begin to pretend that I knew what he said. So I asked him to repeat again. And again, I was confused and I was like, oh no, it's that third, when you're just like, this is not going well. And he said it again. I still look confused. And so then he just got so frustrated with me that he just pointed to a seat and was just like, sit down. And so I got a free bus ride out of that, but I definitely did Google how much the bus was after that so that I would not have that situation happen again. But, it's fair. It's fair. And I got used to the accent after a few days. So.
Yeah, I was going to say to you, was that more to do with the accent or the money or both?
Right.
Both.
Just a bit of all of it, right? I was,
Yeah.
My first few days in Scotland. So I was equally as excited as I was overwhelmed, but definitely learned from that experience to kind of have an idea of what I'm getting myself into before I go to the bus.
Yeah, better to have that earlier on and then know what not to do.
Right.
So what other things were there? Obviously the bus and public transport more generally, but there must have been millions of other things when you first arrived.
Right. And then, like you said, it's absolutely about the little silly things that you kind of feel a little bit embarrassed to ask the question. For me, one of them was just, which side of the sidewalk do you walk on? Because in the US, it's kind of a universal known thing that you walk on the side of the street that you drive on. It's just everyone kind of silently obeys this rule. But in Scotland, it was just willy-nilly wherever. And that's not really a big deal. But I just remember being shocked that everyone was just kind of merging through each other, walking down the halls. And I was like, why is there no order to this? So that was a bit of a shock, I guess you could say, as silly as it may sound. That was something that I definitely noticed to be different. Another one.
Not silly at all. I don't think I even knew that. Like, I've been to the US once, but I never even thought about that. I was like, that makes so much more sense. Why don't we have it regimented like traffic?
It's just so funny. Yeah, it's just one of those things you don't really think about until it's, like you said, until it's different, and then you definitely notice it.
Yeah, it's just a free-for-all on our pavements, definitely.
Right.
Especially in London, you're more likely to get shoved out the way.
Right. Oh yeah. Right. A bit more aggressive.
Great. So from everyday life to student life, we'll start with the academic side of student life, because I'm sure you have a whole host of things you want to say about that.
Right.
Did you study at all? Did you study in the US before you studied here, and what were the differences?
Yes. So I was a good bit through my bachelor's degree in the US. So I went abroad in my spring semester of my junior year. So of my third year, that's a cultural difference there, is that in the US, we call it freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. And it's like first, second, third, fourth. So yes, I had a good idea of what the US was like. And when I got to Scotland, I was very shocked at the education system differences, but it turned out to be great. But yeah, the first couple of weeks definitely took a little bit of an adjustment period, just because it was far less of a workload weekly, at least. I was very used to having weekly exams, weekly papers, even tests every week in different classes. I was always preparing for some sort of exam or report. But in Scotland, we only really had kind of a midterm project. It was a group project, and then end of semester essay. And I just couldn't bear that at first. I could not digest this because I would just be walking around campus and be like, what are people doing right now? We don't even have anything to do. I was like, why are people in the library? I was just kind of like, am I missing something here? Because I just feel like I have so much more free time. But then I found out that free time is placed with reading and kind of getting yourself well-rounded with the information in class. And so once I kind of got that and understood the flow, I fell in love with that type of education because I just felt like I could sit with the material longer and really get that ingrained in me, and I could talk about it a lot better, and I could write about it a lot better because I just had a more well-rounded idea of what everything was about. So I really enjoyed that.
That's so interesting. It's a really interesting perspective because I know in the UK, the jump from A levels or sixth form to university study, that's a big difference, is that it's independent study, and you've never really, you do a little bit of it at A level, you kind of ease in from one to the other, but that is definitely, I'd say, the defining thing about university level is a lot of it is on you. It's how you get out of it what you put in. But it's really interesting to hear you say that that's the difference even between UK and US universities. I wouldn't have known that or thought that. So it's also good to hear you say you fell in love with it, because I think it is a nice way to learn. It requires a lot of discipline.
Right.
Nice way to do it.
I think if you love what you study, it's a pretty easy thing to fall into if you can, get in that groove. And another thing kind of adding on to that is that we had lectures and seminars. So the lectures were kind of, hundreds of students in there with the main professor, and you kind of had your big chunk of information given to you then, and, your note taking. And then in the seminars is smaller groups, maybe 20 people, and you kind of got to talk with, I guess, like a teaching assistant of sorts, maybe like a grad student or someone that kind of led group discussions and kind of provoked thoughts on the things you had learned that week. And I just thought that was a wonderful thing too, because in the US, you really only get 2 lectures, and you're kind of meant, if you want to talk about what you learned, you're meant to just kind of get together your own study groups, and even those are a little bit less productive because it's just the students there with no one to kind of keep you in order. So I really thought that was a great thing as well, as far as just kind of keeping you on track and making sure that you can talk about what you learned, because I think that's such a huge part of the learning process. You can find so many gaps in your education when you can speak about the things you've learned rather than just maybe write or quiz yourself a bit.
Gosh, absolutely. And I think it is quite a British sort of image, isn't it? Of, I think it goes a long way back of, academics going to their lectures, studying, but then they do the rest of their learning round the table or in the pub even. And in Britain's case, it's because it's those discussions, isn't it? It's the discussions that you have amongst your peers. The learning doesn't stop in the classroom, definitely. And I think it's really nice to hear that was one of the things, your key observations, because it's so true. But we don't really think about it, I suppose. We just take it for granted.
Right. Yeah. I loved it. I definitely am a fan of that type of education system. It definitely, for me, it really fit my learning style.
Oh, that's so good. You must have got so much out of that as well.
Yes, definitely.
So, on the note of a work-life balance as a student, from the academic side of student life onto the leisure side, what were the things, those sort of stark contrasts that you found with UK universities?
Yes. So the first one, I'm smiling already because I was just, in our orientation for the international students, they did take a moment to kind of acknowledge the American students, not to party too much or go crazy while we were on campus. But then I was shocked when I found out there was a pub on the campus. I was shocked because in the US university, we're not allowed to have alcohol on campus, even at sports events like football games, which are a big deal.
Oh,
you're not meant to
really?
drink. Yeah, it's a very big deal. It's very, against the rules. And so when I got to Scotland and there was a pub on campus, that was a bit of a shocking moment for me because I was just thinking, this is against everything I've ever learned. I can't believe that this is happening, but it was wonderful. The pub on campus was, again, a very leisurely place to go. They had karaoke nights on Tuesday, which I was always there for that one. And
Excellent.
a lot of other events, maybe throughout the semester. And that was a kind of a meeting place for a lot of me and my friends. We would meet up and hang out in the pub and then maybe head out on the town at night or just stay there all night. It was just kind of a really good spot for students to go and just kind of, relax a bit.
I think that's a really nice thing about campus universities, actually, because for our listeners who don't know or haven't come to university here yet, there's campus and non-campus universities in the UK. And so the campus ones, it's where sort of everything is all in one place. And there's definitely pros and cons to both, but that is a really nice element of campus university life is you have your own little community, don't you? And
right.
on-campus pub is a big part of that, whether it's sometimes it's your student union bar, sometimes, as you say, it's a pub on campus. But yeah, I can imagine that must have been quite the shock if that was not the case at home. And is that because in the US a lot of students who have started university aren't 21 yet, presumably?
Right, exactly. So, you start university at 18, drinking age is 21. So there's a few years. So I guess just to avoid any sticky situations, they just completely cut it out in general. And so no access to anything like that. We don't really have, and I don't know that there's really any universities that I know of in the US that have kind of areas for students just to go and hang out like that.
Really?
We have a student kind of, I forget what it's called, like a student hall of sorts, but it's just where the food court is. And so, you don't really want to be there all day, every day. It's not really a place that people do go just to sit and chat. So you'll find that a lot of times the library kind of becomes the social hour in the US, kind of the place where people talk, the first floor at least. So yeah, I really appreciated that. In the UK, at least at the University of Stirling, there were places like that where you could kind of separate your student life, your working bits, your studying from your fun and social life, different kind of, divides there. And one other thing that popped into my head is that the University of Stirling also had a movie theater on campus.
Oh,
so
wow.
It was a wonderful kind of thing. They had discounted tickets for students. So that was another thing I would do whenever it rained, couldn't really get out on the weekends. I would just pop into the theater and watch a film. And that was a really fun way to kind of, unwind on the weekend as well.
That's so lovely. It's a really nice idea. And I think that's it. There's a lot of organization around student spare time, isn't there? Most of the UK universities I've been to myself and visited, I think that there's a lot of activities which are for your spare time. Speaking of which, a big one of UK university life is Freshers Week, which is quite funny actually, because you said earlier we have like freshman year and we totally stole that word.
Right. Yeah.
You may call them freshmen, but Freshers Week has stuck.
Yes.
Did you do the whole Freshers Week thing, or was that not the point when you arrived?
Right. So for me, we didn't have a proper Freshers Week because it was the spring term. So they didn't really do it the same way they do the Freshers Week in the fall. But they did have a few days where they kind of did a mini Freshers Week for us. And that included, one of the things was they had like discounted tickets to the Foo Bar downtown. So they kind of had a night at the Foo Bar where people would go and just hang out. And that was really fun. I must say, the music was something that shocked me. It's very different. The music in the clubs, maybe at least the ones I went to, which was very few. So maybe my opinion is not super researched here, but the music was just very different, and completely different environment was set by that. It was kind of more like, in my mind, older like pop songs. And
I was
in the
just gonna
US,
say, I was like, good
yeah,
different or bad
yeah,
different?
right. No, not really good or bad, just different. I don't know. So that was something that like me and if I had a few other American friends, Canadian friends, and we were just kind of like, this music is definitely a different tone. So I would love to know if someone from the UK went out in the US, if yet they noticed a difference in the songs and the kind of the vibe, if you will, of the whole thing, according to the music. That was something that I was like, okay, this is different.
Interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
I love that.
Yeah, but yeah, I definitely didn't really get the full freshers experience. So I'm kind of sad about that, but I am looking to go back for my master's, which I don't know that they do freshers for masters, do they now? Because you're meant to be a little more sophisticated, I guess, at that
think
point.
You can make your own.
Right,
I mean,
exactly. You
says?
should. You can never stop having fun in life. So
Exactly.
who knows?
You're never too
Maybe.
sophisticated for a freshers.
Right. So we'll see. We'll see if I get a little bit more of that next time around.
I mean, that brings us quite nicely on to, I'd say the biggest one we get, obviously, when we talk about culture shock, being a student in the UK, is obviously the British drinking culture.
All right.
Not sure if it's a good thing that we're known for it, but, you know, and
right.
same with England or Scotland or Northern Ireland. I think it's sort of generally one that crops up a lot. Is that something that struck you when you first arrived?
To be honest, you know, there are always those people that live on the extremes that are anywhere in the world. But in general, I kind of thought that the British drinking culture was a bit nicer because it's just a bit more steady. It's just a bit more, you know, less about, you know, going crazy and more just about enjoying your night, having a good laugh. And whereas in the US and maybe other areas, I don't know. But for me, it's kind of like when you're drinking, you are there to drink. That is your goal for the night. And you're meant to go, you know, as crazy as you can. But I really liked that British drinking culture was just more about kind of hanging around at a pub or hanging out with your friends and having a, you know, beer or two, something like this. And it was just a lot more, you know, calm and relaxed. So I enjoyed that.
That's interesting, and it's nice to hear that, actually, because you're right. I think obviously it's a sort of tongue-in-cheek reputation thing, but it is, you're right, it's probably more casual, like it's going to the pub, isn't it? It's going for a pint or two. It's much more ingrained, and especially I guess as we've said, students coming in from the US probably haven't been able to drink legally, because obviously the drinking age is different here. So I think a lot of students, by the time they come to university in the UK, they've already, you know, been legally allowed to drink before they've arrived. So maybe that's another reason why it's a bit more likely. They've learned how to do it.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely. That's a good point for sure. You're not as restrained. You can kind of experiment first and find your niche and then kind of go from there. You don't have to hold back and go crazy once you have the opportunity.
Exactly. Yeah. So obviously, hopefully Brits are known for other pastimes, not just based around alcohol. Were there other hobbies and clubs and things you took part in when you were here that were quite British specific or not?
Yes. Right. Yeah. So absolutely. Definitely. The drinking culture was like a very small bit of the whole experience when I was in Scotland. One of my most notable and most enjoyable was joining the mountaineering club. That was so much fun. I mean, we do hiking a lot in the US, and, you know, at least for me, it was more just kind of like, oh, you know, do you guys feel like going for a hike tomorrow? Let's just, you know, go for a little stroll. But this mountaineering club, they called it hill walking, which to me was like, oh, a walk. Easy. Okay, I got this. No. I showed up to this event and we got there very early, maybe 7 a.m. And we did not walk up a mountain. We climbed up a mountain. It was so difficult physically for me, but I really loved it. It was, I mean, you know, because when you do those types of things, when you get to the top, you just forget about all the struggle and it's just beautiful. And Scotland has some of the most beautiful landscapes you could ever imagine. So I found myself a lot of times doing some of the mountaineering club events because I just loved it. And also that was one of my main ways of kind of making Scottish friends, because in a lot of other areas of my university time, I was with international students. My flat was all international students. My classes were somehow a lot of international students. So for me, this was a really great spot for me to kind of get immersed in the Scottish culture with Scottish people and just kind of have a different type of experience I can't have at home. So I really loved that.
It's a really lovely point, because we talk a lot about how to make friends as an international student, and obviously that balance of sometimes it can be quite segregated, as you've just said. Sometimes if all your classes, if everything you're doing is already with other international students, clubs are a perfect way to meet home students and mingle, and it's so nice to blend the two, definitely.
Yes. And additionally, we did have an international student association, which I did take part in as well. But the good thing about that was that they kind of helped us, take baby steps into the different types of Scottish cultural events, such as a ceilidh. I don't know if you've ever taken part in one of those, but that was such a blast. Oh, such a blast. I loved that. We had a little Burns night in a ceilidh, and it was just so much fun. I also tried haggis with the International Student Association. Yes, I'm vegetarian, so I had a vegetarian version, so I kind of cheated out.
I'm a vegetarian as well.
Right.
So
I cheated out a bit, so I don't know if I can give an encompassing review of it, but the kind I had actually, yes, I enjoyed it. It was very nice. And we had the haggis meats and toddies, the whole shebang. And so that was really fun too, to kind of get introduced into the different, cultural things that Scottish people kind of hold close to their heart. And so, yeah, definitely. I definitely had a lot of fun with that.
I love that you went to the ceilidhs. I just find them the most fun. It's the best night. If anyone listening has never been to a ceilidh or heard of a ceilidh, go and
you gotta go. You gotta go. Hear it from us.
Scottish dance, really, isn't it? And
yes.
It's what to do.
Yeah, it takes a minute, but that's the fun. The little bit of challenge you have and learning it is what makes it, I think, a lot of fun.
Definitely. It sounds like you fully immersed yourself in all things Scottish, which is definitely the way to do it.
Definitely.
So it's interesting you mentioned about trying the vegetarian haggis, or haggis or vegetarian haggis, depending which way you're inclined. Because that's obviously a very Scottish thing. It's a staple. But that brings us on to more generally food and drink, because again, it's a big one for culture shock when you're somewhere new. Did you have any other things that were a real surprise or you hadn't heard of?
Yes. So this one, I fully embarrassed myself on this one here. But first, before I go into it, when I say creamer, do you know what that is when I say creamer? Right? Not cream, but creamer. Okay. And so I thought everyone knew this, right? Okay. So I'm going in M&S and I'm like, where is my French vanilla creamer? I can't find it on the shelves. Surely to goodness they have it. So I go up to, find one of the workers at M&S and I'm like, do you have any creamer? And he was like, sorry, creamer, you can put it into your coffee, that kind of thing. And he was like, no, we don't have that. And I was like, well, everyone talks about M&S, but they don't have creamer. So I go on to Sainsbury's and I was like, surely they have creamer. Again, I checked, they don't. I speak to a representative, they do not. And then I was like, okay, this must be something that just doesn't exist over here. So creamer is just kind of like milk, but it's a bit, I don't know, it's just a different, I guess, family member to milk, and you put it in coffee. And here, I mean, in the US, it's everywhere. It's at every grocery store. You can get it at the coffee shops. And a lot of times it can be flavored like vanilla, caramel, or something. I mean, it's incredibly bad for you, but something
it sounds really yummy though.
Yeah, I allow it in my life because it makes me happy. So I definitely went around asking people about creamer when it just doesn't even exist over there. So that was a shock for me, and I had to learn to love a dash of milk instead of creamer when I was over there, because I love a good cup of coffee with little creamer in there. So that was something that shocked me, because I just never known that wasn't a worldwide thing.
Okay, so another fairly obvious one, but one that we have to talk about, is of course the British weather. So are you from a hot part of the US, or what was your culture shock experience with the weather?
Right. So in Alabama, it's very humid, and if it gets cold, and to me, again, this is also relative, so I feel some people could roll their eyes at me saying this, but when it gets cold, it gets pretty cold. It might snow once a year, but not like a proper snow, maybe like throughout one day, and then the next day it'll melt away. But in the summers, it is terribly hot. Like, I am always in a irritable mood because I am much more a fan of the cold weather. So Scotland was right up my alley. Although I had never experienced that kind of cold. I was not prepared. I did not bring the right clothes or shoes or coats. So I definitely had to kind of gear up once I got there and once I had experienced it. But I definitely loved it. I would have to say though, it does not rain as much as people say. I am going to go ahead and
Wow.
dismiss that myth. I did not feel that it rained that much. And if it did rain, it was so light, you kind of almost could go without an umbrella. But maybe I just got lucky with my season being there. I do not know. Maybe you have a different opinion. But for me, it was just, it was nothing like what I had expected.
That's so interesting. I was like, I mean, yeah, I suppose my reaction to it is partly experience, but also partly because it's just, again, it's one of those stereotypes maybe, but one of those
Right.
things that it's so known for. I
Right.
think more than just the amount of rain, it's the you never have any warning. Like from
Mm,
we don't really have we have seasons definitely, but within those seasons, there's seasons.
right. Right.
You can't guarantee like summer will be hot and dry. Like you just
Exactly.
don't know.
Get a bit of it all, don't you?
Another great topic when it comes to culture shock is accents and dialects. We have a lot of them in the UK, as you may have experienced. And obviously, there's the culture shock aspect of, as you started this by saying, trying to understand
Yes.
the accents, but also just the sheer number. I don't know if you have any first-hand experience of that.
Right. Yeah, no, definitely. So I just was reminded that when I first went to the UK, I flew into London. So I was trying to navigate the tube and I couldn't figure it out exactly. So I was asking one of the people that works there how to get somewhere. And he was like, can you speak English, please? And I was like, okay, this is my accent being a problem in this
Oh,
moment. So
wow.
definitely, no matter where you go, somebody doesn't know what you're saying and you might not know what they're saying. So this is kind of a normal thing, I guess. But
Yeah.
once we got past the bus driver situation in Scotland, I then was, kind of smooth sailing. I could understand what everybody was saying. But it was when I was in a group project and it was all boys, all Scottish boys, and we were in a group chat. Now, it's the talking in person is fine. I can kind of make do. I can fill in the gaps maybe with some of the slang with context. But when it's messaging and I just get lost. Some of the slang, I just did not know what they were saying. So that was quite fun, actually. I kind of liked learning the slang and different sayings, though I don't know if I ever quite fully understood some of them. It was
Do you
such a
have any
fun.
favorites, any highlights of sayings that you
Um,
learned?
so of course, like the typical everyone says cheers, or if you're leaving, even coming in, or kind of like as a thank you. It's a very universal word, I would say, as far as how
Mhm.
you can use it. What else? A lot of I remember asking where the trash was, and and someone, how you kind of want to almost like compete with your words. So I was like, where's the trash? And they're like, the rubbish. I was like, yeah, the trash. And they're like, oh, the rubbish is over there. So
You
that
get
was
into
so
like a
funny.
back and forth.
Yes,
I'm not
yes, it's
giving
all
in.
good fun. Yeah, it's all good fun.
So we're coming to the end of our episode now. Olivia, just so that you know, what we like to do as we wrap up these episodes is our do's and don'ts. So this is basically our top learnings from the topic that we've just discussed. So I'd love to hear your do's and don'ts when it comes to culture shock.
Okay. So I think my do is let yourself feel silly, because you will. There's going to be moments where you are like, oh my goodness, I feel so uncomfortable. I feel so out of my shell right now. But those moments are when you really find, like, if you just kind of let go of all your inhibitions and you just kind of let yourself be in the moment and try new things and, go with the flow, you'll have the best experiences when you let yourself do that. And then my don't would be, don't let yourself get behind in school, because I think being an international student, there's so much going on all the time, always an opportunity to travel or, hang out with new people. And especially in my case, with having a lot more free time, if you will, it's really easy to kind of forget why you're there because you're having so much fun. So, just check in with yourself, kind of get used to setting a schedule for your school, and just don't let yourself get behind.
Great. So I think my do of the week is do join a club or a society if you feel that there's one you're interested in, or even if you're not that interested in it. I think it's such a good way to meet new people, and as you said, Olivia, a really good way to mix with home students and international students alike. I think it's one of those easy ins that could solve a lot of your other problems, especially if you're feeling a little bit lonely. It's just nice to feel like you belong to something. And I think in turn that helps with that culture shock of feeling completely overwhelmed, feeling you don't know anything or you don't know what you're doing. It's just nice to have something. I think routine as well, it builds in a bit of routine. And as you said, with your hill walking or what turned out to be mountaineering, you just might discover something that you didn't even know you loved, which I think, it sounds like that kind of careers counselor thing to say, like join a club, join a society. And I know how scary and daunting that is when you're new at university, but it's definitely the best decision you can make in terms of avoiding that really feeling lost and overwhelmed.
Yes, I definitely agree.
Yeah. And my don't, I would say, it sounds like an easy one and a broad one, but just don't be too scared. And I think that comes back to what you were saying, as you know, having an open mind. But don't be scared of the fact that if you do get on the bus and you don't know what someone's saying or you can't count your change, I think whenever we're somewhere new and foreign and scary, you feel like you're the only person doing stupid things.
Right.
And you're just not. We've all done it. We've all felt completely out of our depth somewhere, and sometimes it might all get on top of you, and it feels like people are looking at you like, well, how can you not understand this? But that's really not the case. We all know how that feels to be a fish out of water. So just don't be afraid of that feeling. And as you said, you can turn that into a positive, and they can become some of the best memories you have. And they might give you material to be talking about it on a podcast one day.
There you go. Exactly. But yeah, that's so important though, like you said, to not be afraid of that feeling and to just keep going. You know, I think that's just something you'll constantly have when you are living abroad somewhere. So that is such an important point that you just said, to just keep going. You know, don't be afraid of that feeling. And you are not the only one who is making mistakes. Even locals are sometimes, you know, it's a lot. So.
Oh, I've lived here my whole life and I make mistakes all the time.
Yeah, of course.
Easily done. Things are confusing.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Well, I think that's about all we've got time for. I just want to say thank you, Olivia, so much for joining us. This has been brilliant. All of your tips and your first-hand experience. It's so great to hear from you. And it's been a pleasure having you on. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It's been wonderful. And I'm a big fan of Great British Mag, so I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, that's so nice to hear. So thank you so much to everyone who's tuned in. We really hope we'll see you again next time for the next episode. We can't wait. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.
GB Mag